Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do diagnostic assessment, advocacy, and intervention. I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
My name is Kim Sharman. I'm a reading and writing remediation specialist working with kids of all ages with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
I have to say we're on the ball today. This is going to be our second video for today, so star for us, catching up from some of the weeks we missed. All right, so we are going to talk about basic
Accommodations.
accommodations, okay? So we've done just a little slideshow. I know it's super simple, but we wanted to get this up fast. Now, common misconception is that there's a difference between accommodations that you would get in an individualized education plan called an IEP or accommodations you would get in what's called a Section 504 plan. Okay. Just to clarify, an IEP comes with direct instruction to address academic uh, that affect how a student is performing in school because their disability affects their ability to learn. So, the specially designed instruction called SDI is intended to go in and provide targeted instruction for that student to be able to make adequate academic progress. So, kind of a common example of that would be if a student has visual impairments and needs to learn Braille, an IEP goal would be written around learning to read Braille. For a student with dyslexia or dysgraphia, which are the two areas that we're going to talk to you about today, SDI or specially designed instruction would be around teaching reading or teaching writing or teaching whatever. Okay. So under that IEP, there is a list of accommodations as well. And a Section 504 plan that's part of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is accommodations that allow equal access to the learning environment. So there's no specially designed instruction, but if, again, let's go back to the student that has a visual impairment, they would have their books presented in Braille. A student with dyslexia and dysgraphia will have a whole bunch of different accommodations. Not that the individual with visual impairment wouldn't, but we're going to go over some of the basic ones. And the rate of occurrence of a specific learning disability relative to visual impairments is much higher. But let me also say we have this broken out into two subsections, and Kim said, let's just list five in each. Just because there's one in dysgraphia, if your child hasn't been diagnosed with dysgraphia, and it would be useful to them, do not feel like you can't ask for it. So we just categorized it as a simple way. Go ahead, Kim.
Before we get going, I just want to say that the ADA, Americans with Disability Act, which supports the 504 plan, is this is a
Yes.
federal law. So when
Yes.
you get your 504 plan from the school, it's not just a throwaway plan. The school doesn't just can just ignore it. It is real, and you as a parent have the right to fight for these accommodations. With the
Yes.
IEP, isn't it more state-led?
The IEP is still under federal law, but states um, are responsible for the implementation of the law. And there is case law behind IEPs so that if the IEP is not followed, you have grounds to go to something called due process. But let's not get into the weeds.
Yeah, I just want to
Accommodations on an IEP and accommodations on a Section 504 can literally be the exact same accommodations. There is nothing different or special about being in either group. Okay, here's another big one. There is no law anywhere. Let me say that one more time. There is no law anywhere that limits the number of accommodations you can have or mandates that you have to have a certain number of accommodations. There is no law that says that. None.
so
None.
you can have 10.
You could have 50. You could have one. It's what does the student need?
And
That,
the school can't take them away from you if they say you don't need that anymore.
right.
That happens too sometimes.
All right. So we went with dyslexia first. I don't know why we just did. So, and this was just a quick brainstorm. To give parents perspective and other clinicians perspective, I have a database of accommodations, and I probably have 150 or more accommodations in my database. Um, and of those, there are sub-variations of them. So, and I'm always writing new accommodations. Like I am constantly adding and modifying and tweaking because society changes. All right, so let's talk about the first one, which is no oral reading in class. So I know kids who hate reading, and everybody will be called on to read. So they count ahead to figure out what paragraph they're going to be asked to read. And they read it over and over and over again so that when they get called on to read, they know how to read it. And what's really funny is when somebody gets skipped and then they're off by a paragraph, and
Oh,
they haven't, it's awful. But you should never force anyone to read aloud in front of their peers unless they volunteer. If you need to assess their oral reading fluency, which we do in elementary school and middle school, it's important to know where kids are at. Don't make them do it in front of their peers. Don't. It's awful. It's miserable. I got mocked so many times for misreading a word. It's
really?
horrific. In our other video, we talked about anxiety. That's a source of anxiety, like developing anxiety. Everybody's going to think I'm dumb because I can't read a word right, or I skip words, or I misread words, whatever. Okay. Kim, take the next one.
This is really important. And I worked with another woman to get our district to purchase Learning Ally.
Which
Having
is
books,
what? What is Learning
learning,
Ally?
it used to be called, how do you say it?
Recordings for the blind and dyslexic.
For the blinds and dyslexics. So Learning Ally, basically, every textbook in the entire universe, or they try to
Not
make it,
quite, but all
right, but
textbooks are available. And if
all
it's not
textbooks,
read, they will read it.
and they will read it for you. And so what it is, and I'm not saying that I know the technicalities of how it's downloaded, but basically, if your kid is doing AP, uh,
Chemistry.
geography or chemistry or whatever, that book can be read to you chapter by chapter by chapter. The ideal situation is that the kid can listen and look at the textbook at the same time so that they can see the words and hear the words. They can stop the auditory listening and take notes on what they just heard and learned. They can look at the spelling right in front of them. So they have the auditory and the visual stimulation.
Yeah.
It is so important. And when it comes to listening to literature, you can use Audible. It's hard to find. Immersive reading is the term that I've learned, Cindy, that actually includes the ability to listen and have each word highlighted. And there are certain, if you hear the term immersive reading and you have access to it at your school, I don't know if public schools have it, but that is also extremely helpful.
Yes,
What,
there's
Mike?
immersive reading apps as well on the iPad. There are ways to get into immersive reading environments. Um, I love you because you actually point out the huge variability between districts. You have districts with a lot of money where, of course, you can have that, and you have districts with no money that getting access to Learning Ally is out of their budget range. And so, Learning Ally, by the way, the reason they changed from Recordings for the Blind and Dyslexic to Learning Ally is they recognized individuals with ADHD can benefit from listening to the book as they're following along, and it helps them stay focused. There were other people out there that didn't fit under those headings that would benefit from Learning Ally. Bookshare is another version of that. And then every computer today has an accessibility feature, and it is possible to turn on text to speech, meaning the computer will read whatever document to you. You can change voices, you can do all sorts of great stuff, and the computer will read it to you. And there are great workarounds. And so getting it in an audible format is not what it used to be 30 or 40 years ago. There are occasional ones that are like really tricky, like Catcher in the Rye. Salinger refuses to have it in an audible book. And so that one can be tricky to get your hands on. Um, but there are ways to work around everything, and we'll do an assistive technology presentation another day. All right, let's talk about the next one.
Extended time for tests, so important.
Why?
Um, because for a dyslexic student, and again, this goes from average IQ to men's IQ, it doesn't matter. If a kid does not recognize every phoneme, every sound in the English language, the time it takes for them to read and comprehend can be 2 to 3 times longer than someone who does not have dyslexia.
Yeah.
It is a huge amount of time and energy that they spend reading.
And by the way, the previous accommodation of text in audible format can apply to tests. So if you are giving a kid a physics test and they're all a bunch of story problems, that that student should be able to have all of that read aloud to them while they have extended time to take the test.
But how would that happen? Would a human
Um,
do it, or
a human
could
do
someone
it,
else?
a computer can do it.
So
Like
they'd have to scan it in, right, as a PDF or
there
something?
there are amazing ways to work around it. We're not going to get into the weeds on
All
it.
right.
I know it's tempting, but we still have another 7 accommodations to go through.
Okay.
We'll do another one on assistive tech and we'll do another one on how we get some of these put in place. Okay. My personal favorite is watch the movie video prior to reading the book. Why?
Because it allows the dyslexic person to visualize and get the big picture of the book. And now when
Character
they
name,
read,
plot, setting. Yeah,
and you have to be a little bit careful because sometimes the movie version will have a little bit variation. But I also have kids read short snippets from the New York Times or Kirkus Reviews, or I have them read reviews of books. I want them to create the buckets in their head of ideas of what is the kernel of what is the universal truth that this book is
right,
talking about.
right. Um, Having them, so a common book we ask kids to read is The Great Gatsby. And if you haven't seen what the time period looks like, you don't understand some of the nuances of the story. And so watching the movie helps kids begin to visualize what the time period looked like. How did people dress? What were manners like? How was speech presented? What was society looking like? What's happening? So as they read it, they get more out of it. Now, everybody will say, I don't want kids to watch the movie because then they won't read the book. And the answer is stop the movie before you get to the end. And then they have to get access to the rest of it, like listen or read the entire thing to get to the ending. But there is so much benefit that they gain from having those contextual clues that they get so much more out of it and they can actually follow the book. I frequently talk with kids about passive reading versus active reading. Passive reading is my eyes go over the words and I don't really gain meaning from it. Active reading is I'm actually reading and getting into the story. But when we have our kids that 3 or 4 pages in are working so hard to decode, they can't remember who the characters are. And so then they become a passive reader and their eyes go over and they get nothing out of the book. Like kids become passive readers when they can't access the meaning of the text, and that defeats the purpose. Okay, let's do prior teaching, pre-teach prior to reading the text, which dovetails nicely with the one that we just said.
This is the most important thing of all, in my opinion, because I use something called Shmoop, SHMOOP, but there's also Lit Chart or whatever. The
Oh,
reason why, you know,
Wikipedia offers a summary. Like there's tons of them out there.
yeah, but like if these
YouTube.
kids don't know what prohibition is or who the
Right.
flappers were or the haves and the haves not during the Great Gatsby, how are they supposed to visualize this? How are they supposed to understand the meaningfulness of this book? When you pre-teach, once again, I don't know, Cindy, if this is true with all kids with dyslexia, but some kids don't see anything in their head when they read phrases. They don't
Not
see
the
pictures.
same for everybody, but go
It's
ahead.
all different. But this helps when you pre-teach. It also makes it interesting if you're reading 1984 or some dystopian novel. The Animal
Animal
Farm.
Farm.
Yeah, you talk about who these characters are in relation to Russian history. You also talk about the difficulty the author had in getting this book published. Why was it such a big deal? you enrich, it's like enriching the book, and it's not just this stupid book about animals running a farm. It is about 100,000 times deeper than that, and you have to pre-teach in order to give that meaning when they're reading the book.
So, for example, there's a book, and I'm not going to get the name exactly right, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, about a young man in Africa who figured out how to create a wind generator. And I had a kid reading that, and they're like, don't they just have electricity in the wall? And giving them, this is what a village in Africa looks like. This is what it looks like to have to go collect your water. This is what it looks like when you don't have lights when the sun goes down at this time of the day. Like, if you don't have a mental picture, the story loses so much meaning. And so, I pull out a map and I say, where in the world is this taking place? Let's talk about what this area of the country or the world looks like. What's happening? What do the people look like? What are the belief systems? What is the time period? What's happening in the rest of the world? Otherwise, the purpose of reading goes out the window, and kids
Yep.
don't get the depth and breadth of the experience that we really want them to have.
And I
Okay.
do this with history all the time. They
Yes.
have no idea, like the
And
context
I
of
just
history.
blew it there. Hang on. I managed to click through my dysgraphia because I didn't um, get to the right page, and um, I'm trying to get it to play, and there we go. And I'll click through, and now we'll go on to the dysgraphia. We were experiencing minor technical difficulties. All right, dysgraphia. How do I take what's in my head and put it down through my hand? Um, Writing samples, one of my absolute favorites. Kim, what is a writing sample and why do we do it?
When you give expectations for a kid with dysgraphia who maybe could beautifully articulate a response to a prompt, but then you see what he or she writes on paper and it's very different. They need help knowing what your expectations are. It doesn't mean they're going to copy your writing sample, but show them from a past year or 5 years ago an example of what a good paragraph looks like or a good sentence looks like.
Or a lab report or a research paper or a blah, 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 blah. I cannot tell you how empowering this is. I remember in graduate school at Northwestern, they handed us 3 or 4 diagnostic reports so that the first time we wrote the diagnostic report, we had a clue as to how we were supposed to structure it, what was supposed to be included, how is it supposed to be put together, what kinds of information are they looking for, and why. Um, what language do I use? What does the formatting of the bibliography look like? What does the formatting of a footnote look like if we're using footnotes? Like, it just does so much for not only the student, but anybody working with the student. And that could be a parent, that could be a tutor, that could be another teacher, like in a learning support class. Everybody is on the same page as to what the expectations are. Does not have to be the same topic. So if we're writing research papers in um, on Shakespeare's plays, you could give them a sample of Macbeth for writing Hamlet or whatever. Give them a target. Here's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. They literally cannot visualize what you want for them and they get stuck. Dysgraphic writers get stuck and they need to be unstuck. This helps.
And we see parents that talk about the breakdown that occurs at 10 o'clock at night when the paper is due the next day, and you've got a kid in extreme distress, crying and weeping and upset and overwhelmed and in anguish, and you affect the entire family. So and it's super simple. Just keep a couple good examples. And if you need to, change it up a little bit. You don't have to say who it's from or anything else. There are ways to modify it fairly quickly. There's no reason in today's day and age that you can't provide a writing sample. All right, reducing the
Uh,
number of items.
ugh, quality, not quantity. This is going to go for dysgraphia. Remember, dysgraphia means that the difficulty with the brain coordinating with the fingers to get your thoughts out and your information out on paper. And you have no idea how distressing that is for kids who know that they're smart inside, but all people see is something that represents someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, or a very simplified version.
Well, what sparked this today was your student that's in a high cap math class who gets sent home a ton of math homework, and he is 100% capable of doing the homework. However, there's so many items and his dysgraphia is so severe, it turns into meltdown every night, and he doesn't think he's capable of being in the class, and he's absolutely in the right place. If he
Right.
didn't have to do 40 problems and could do 20 or even 15, where we focus on a couple of warm-ups and then challenge problems, right? There's it's not about doing the same thing 900 times. It's demonstrating you understand a concept. Um,
So I asked the teacher, please, out of these 25 math problems, circle, six variations that you want him to learn of solving these problems and see how he does with them. He
yeah,
has to show his work, or she has to show her work. Show your work, see if they understand the concept.
yeah,
And because remember, dysgraphia would be like you as a parent writing with your opposite hand all day long.
all day long.
That's
And you come home after having done that all day long and then still have more homework to do.
and you
Um,
have to present neat handwriting and numbers and line everything up perfectly. How tired would you be?
I cannot believe we forgot this.
What?
We forgot to put scribe down as an
Oh my gosh,
accommodation.
you're right.
I feel like a complete dork.
Yeah.
So scribe, meaning parent, you can have the kid tell you what they want it to say, and you can write out the math, and they're telling you what to write where, and you're the scribe, or you could be writing their written response to the prompt. Or what you and I do all the time is tell me what you want it to say, and I keyboard it while the kid watches as I write what they're saying. Or they don't watch. Like if they don't want to see it, that's fine too. And you read it back to them. So I cannot believe we left scribe off there. Scribe should be above writing samples. Our apology. Scribe
And
is huge.
and I don't know if you're going to get this at school. I mean, we've gotten it at private schools, in public schools. If you have an IEP, maybe you could get some of it. I don't know.
It depends on what grade you're in and all of those kinds of things. But another alternative for a human scribe is uh, speech to text. So you dictate into the computer, and that is pretty much built in on every device these days, from phones to desktop computers to tablets. Like the accessibility features have that in there. The quality can vary, but there's no reason not to have that as an option for kids.
But
So,
again, you'd have to make that accommodation so the person could be in a quiet space and do it.
right. All right. Notes from teacher slash peer for every class.
Wow. And this is the hardest one to get and the most important one to get of all, to me.
Okay, see, I would disagree with that, but go ahead. Explain why
Really?
you think that. Yeah. I think
Okay.
scribe is more important, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, scribe is important for getting your intelligence out, but for learning, the learning process. Um, so when you have dysgraphia, if there's notes on the board, if there's math problems on the board, is there a diagram of a cell on the board, that kid cannot listen to you, learn what you're saying to them, and copy and write at the same time. There's two issues. One, the physical act of writing is so arduous that the hearing part and learning part gets covered up when they start to write, because that takes up all their mental energy oftentimes. Um, Also, the ability to hold on to a picture of what you see on the board, whether it's a sentence, a vocabulary word, a picture of a cell, or a math problem, when they look up and they look down, the picture is gone. So they're looking up and down 25,000. Am I right? 20.
100%. I'm laughing because I'm like, nobody would ever be able to read any of my notes from any of the school meetings I go to. I have tried to send them to other people, and people cannot read. I can read my own writing, but other people can't. But it is riddled with errors. I often can't get everything down. It is, um, nobody else is ever going to be able to use what I write for this very
Well, and
reason.
oftentimes I've had kids show me their note. I say, show me your notes. They can't even read them. So this is something that it's really a no-brainer. I mean, really, it can be the notes can be either created, what is the main point of what the teacher was
Right.
giving in that lecture?
Clear
Or
sample.
if a kid, there's got to be a way to
There's
do
also
voice.
smart boards that are transcribing and actually putting all of the notes up in an electronic format. It's it's huge. Now, we have this major issue, which is, and I get it, cell phones in class are a major issue, and I 100% agree. However, there are situations in which a cell phone is important for a student that has a learning difference. And that does not mean that they're sitting there and scrolling social media. It means the phone is out, they take a picture, the phone is back away. It does not mean they're sitting there and using their phone for anything other than a screenshot. It is not to use other features or functions in it, and it is not using it the entire time they're in the lecture. Okay.
But if phones aren't in the classroom and the kid doesn't have an iPad where they can take a picture of the board, what that means is a hard copy needs to be presented to each
That's
student
the other
of,
alternative,
of the
right?
drawing on the board.
Teacher
I mean,
needs to
that's
give the pictures and the notes. I used to, when I taught, I used to give partial notes. So I would create PowerPoints. I also made my students they had to collect scratch paper so that I could reuse it to print notes out for everybody of my PowerPoint slides, so we didn't waste a ton of paper.
yeah.
It was great, and it motivated them to be more paper conscious. And today you just store them electronically, and you can send them out to kids in all sorts of different formats. All right, let's talk about writing format, which is an alternative way for us to say we kind of put in scribe or not, but and there should be a comma after typing. Um, you can print, you can write in cursive, you can keyboard, you can speak. Those are all ways to get your ideas from here down onto the page, and you as a teacher cannot require one way over another.
I've heard that laptops are being not allowed in classrooms, which I get. So guess what? If they have to type and the kid can't write out their 5 paragraph essay, they need to give a laptop or something that doesn't
Right.
have
And the
access.
answer is you just disconnect the accessibility to the internet. Super simple.
But
Like
these
turn
are
off
all
the
things that
Wi-Fi.
have to be pre-prepared for.
Yeah. But that's also why we have learning centers and testing centers in schools so that kids can go do these kinds of things. All right, let's talk about the last one, which is alternative assessment methods. How can we test what the child knows without requiring them, or the student knows without requiring them to put pencil, pen, finger to paper to demonstrate what they know? So, one of the common accommodations I give is the ability to expand upon their answers by talking to the teacher and giving an oral response. We can give them a different activity to do rather than a written test. We can reduce the writing load. So there are ways to work around assessments so that a student who fatigues early can demonstrate what they know. So, and by the way, once again, and we've technically given you 11 accommodations now, just because it's in dyslexia doesn't mean somebody with dysgraphia can't use it, and somebody who doesn't have a diagnosis of dysgraphia could use dysgraphia accommodations. Dysgraphia is frequently missed. And if you feel that there is a legitimate reason why your student should have any of these accommodations, based on what we've described, you can make the argument for why your student needs these accommodations. There are many more accommodations out there. We're trying not to overwhelm you. These are really big and important ones. And hopefully now you have enough context to help you argue for it for your individual student. Um, Accommodations provide access. It levels the playing field so that our students can show what they know, the depth and breadth of their knowledge, without the learning difference getting in the way. And um, accommodation is not modification, accommodation is fair, and fair is not always equal.
And to me, I just say it removes barriers to success. That's it.
Even better and more succinct. All right, questions, comments, let us know. We always appreciate your feedback.